Hello, welcome to L'Kutei Sichos Chelek Yud Aleph, Sicha Mishpatim Aleph. This Sicha is a Rashi Sicha, like we've mentioned in the past. It's a Sicha that's going to focus on one Rashi in the Parsha. As a matter of fact, in this Sicha, we're going to ask 10 questions on the Rashi, and then with one answer, with one paradigm shift, with one change of perspective, we'll understand what Rashi is trying to teach us, with a very powerful and profound lesson. The topic of the day is an Eved Ivri. Now, of course, you know that there's a concept of Eved Ivri, which basically means one of two things, one of two causes. Either a person was a ganav, he stole and did not have the funds to repay what he stole, and therefore Bezdin sells him for the money to pay back what he stole. This is called machru Bezdin. Bezdin sold the person. Another example is moicher atzmai. A person is down and on his luck, doesn't have any money, and he figures he'll sell himself as an eved, and with that money he'll be able to support himself or his family. So in these two cases, the person becomes an eved ivri. He's a yid, but he's an eved. It's not just an employee, but he's an eved, and there are various ramifications to that, including that during the time that he is an eved, the owner, the boss, the person who owns him is allowed to give him a wife with whom he fathers children. And when he leaves, the owner keeps the woman and the children, and the eved goes out on his own. The maximum time for him to be an eved is 6 years, unless there's a yovel in the middle. But for 6 years, he remains an eved. And in Parshas Mishpatim, it speaks about the dinim of Eved Ivri, and it says that if at the end of the 6 years the person says, I want to stay on, ahafti es adoini, I like my master, or ahafti es ishti ve'es bonai, I like my wife and my children, I want to stay on as an eved, then the halacha is that he is brought to Bezdin, and he's brought to the delas, to the doorway, and his ear is put up against the doorpost of the doorway, and v'ratza adayna v'es oznei b'martzeya v'avodei la'olam. This person, this Eved Ivri, his ear gets pierced with a martzeya, with an awl, and he remains an Eved until yovel, la'olam, until yovel. So this is the pasuk upon which v'ratza adayna v'es oznei b'martzeya. This is the pasuk upon which Rashi is going to come and explain that this is the right ear. It says oznei lashon yachid. It has to be one ear, not both ears. It's the right ear, and Rashi will explain to us why. Rashi explains hayemonis, the right ear. Maybe it's the left ear. Talmud Leimar oizen l'gzeira shava. We learn gzeira shava from the word oizen. Nemar kan v'ratza adayna v'es oznei. Here by the Eved Ivri it says v'ratza adayna v'es oznei, his ear. V'nemar b'mitzoida, my mitzoida, where you have to put oil on his ear and on his thumb and on his big toe. It says tenuch oznei hayemonis. Malahalan hayemonis, just like by the mitzoida, it says clearly the right ear. Afkan hayemonis, so too by the Eved Ivri, we're talking about the right ear. The pastors come on us to Rashi. Seemingly Rashi is coming to imply, to teach us. The pasuk nema v'ratza adayna v'es oznei lashon yachid. The Torah says lashon yachid in single term, the ear, not the ears. Without telling us right ear or left ear. So therefore Rashi comes and tells us that we mean the right ear, the lemedim gzeira shava mitzayda, because we know this from a gzeira shava from mitzayda. But this raises a question. From the fact that Rashi says no, maybe it's the left ear, which is technically extra wording. This teaches us that it would be more logical that the pasuk is telling us the left ear. It's just that we have no choice. We are compelled to learn the right ear because we have the Gzeira Shava from Mitzayda. But if not for the Gzeira Shava from Mitzayda, we would lean to believe that it's the left ear. But Tzarech Lav and Atam, we have to understand why. Why would I think the left ear over the right ear? Why? When Rashi says Oy Einei Shel Smoil, implying that I would think it would be the left ear. Why? Why should I think the left ear over the right ear? Beis umamshich Rashi b'oisay dibur. And Rashi continues in the same dibur, in the same explanation of Rashi, under the same quotation from the pasuk. Why is the ear being chosen to be pierced from all the other limbs in the body? Rabbi Shimon said, the ear that heard on Har Sinai, where the Eibishter said, Lo Signev, do not steal, and he went and he stole, so he has to be pierced. And that brings in the Ha'ara, even though Lo Signev in the Aseres HaDibris doesn't mean stealing money, but nevertheless, number one, Lo Signev is a general terminology for all types of stealing. Number two, B'chlal the Aseres HaDibris were general mitzvahs that include the whole Torah. Moshe, we know that the Aseres HaDibris has 620 words in it. Kiminyan Keser or Kiminyan Tarach. And we know that there's 613 mitzvahs de'iraisa and 613 and 7 mitzvahs mid'Rabbanan, which is 620. So we see how the Aseres HaDibris are koilel all of the mitzvahs of the Torah. So even though Lo Signev specifically in the Aseres HaDibris doesn't mean stealing money, but nevertheless the Aseres HaDibris is a general, includes generally all of the mitzvahs, including Lo Signev. And if we're talking about someone who sells himself, there's also an issue with that. The ear that heard on Har Sinai that the Eibishter is choosing the Yidden as his Avadim. We are Avadim of Hashem. And this person goes and acquires an Adin for himself, not the Eibishter. Tirotza is going to get pierced. And then Rashi continues, Rabbi Shimon mikra zekim in chaymer. Rabbi Shimon would darshan this pasuk like a chaymer. Later in the Sikha, he's going to touch chaymer. Chaymer means to make it more geshmak. Chaymer means either like a diamond or like perfume. It makes it more geshmak, more enjoyable. And he brings in another question that seemingly is irrelevant until this point. And this is what Rabbi Shimon said. The ear is pierced by the doorway, on the doorpost. Why? Why is the door and the doorpost chosen from all the rest of the furniture in the house? So the answer to that is, the Eibishter said, the door and the mezuzah that were witnesses in Mitzrayim. When I passed over the mashkev, the lintel, and the two doorposts of each house that had the blood that the Yidden put from the Korban Pesach. And I said at the time that the Yidden are going to be my avadim, and they shouldn't be slaves to other slaves. Sorry. And then he went against that and he acquired an adin for himself. His ear will be pierced in front of these two witnesses, the delas and the mezuzah. And now we're going to ask a number of questions. I think we already asked one question. Why would we think the left ear? So we're going to be left with, I think, 9 more questions. Number 1. The first question we're going to ask is, why is this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, why the ear is pierced, why is it part of the same Rashi? It's not only it's part of the same Rashi, but he says Uma with a Vav. Uma ra ezen. Why is the ear being pierced? The Vav connects the two, implying that they're one continuation. And the Rebbe is going to ask in question Aleph, why is it not considered a totally separate idea? Question Aleph. Eisen sheshama tiratza harei einay masber lama eisen yamonis dafkin etzas elazeu tam lama eisen etzas v'le'echad mikol shari varan shebeguf. We're not anymore discussing the right ear or the left ear. This is coming to answer b'chlal why the ear is pierced. Ubemela, therefore, seemingly ein lo za kesher v'shaychas mashakasav Rashi lifnei zeh sha'akavana ba'oznei lo eisen yamonis dafka. This seems to be totally disconnected from the earlier discussion in Rashi about the piercing being in the right ear. Rashi should have put them in two separate diburim, in two separate explanations, or at least without a vav connecting the two. Mara v'loy umara. Should have been a period, and then mara, why the ear? Not umara, and why is the ear being pierced, implying that this is a continuation to the first concept. The second question we're going to ask is about the story of the explanation of Rabbi Shimon, which is about the delis and the mezuzah, that seems totally disconnected to this discussion, especially since the delis and the mezuzah were brought up already earlier in the Chumash. So why is it come now after the discussion about the oizen, the ear? Even more questionable is the fact that Rashi brings in the same dibur, in the same explanation, the drash of Rabbi Shimon, why the door and the doorpost, im kavanos lefarish Rashi lefarish hatam lo monishtanu delos mezuzah havalil Rashi lefarish lifnezeh b'dibur b'fnei atzmei ala tevis ala delos ala mezuzah. If Rashi is just trying to explain why the doorpost, he should have brought it earlier when the pasuk introduces the fact that the person is brought to the doorpost. So it must be that al pi pshuti shel mikra, according to the basic understanding of the pasuk, there's no question why the doorpost, and therefore Rashi doesn't bring it over there. Rashi even uses the word doirish. It's a drash. It's a drasha. It's an allegorical interpretation. But the reason that now it gets brought in is because something triggered Rashi to have to explain the delos mezuzah. So we have to understand what is the connection between the drasha of Rabbi Shimon, that the doorpost and the door are the eidim, when the Eibishter said Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim, and he leaped over the homes of the Yidden. And what the Rashi brought earlier before that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that the ear heard on Har Sinai, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim. So that's the second question. Gimel, and the third question, is going to have three details. Three details in this question. Rashi says that this ear that heard leisignev, and he went ahead and he stole, he has to be pierced. And the same thing about someone who sells himself. The ear that heard the words that we are meant to be the Eibishter's avodim and not avodim la avodim. And then he went and he bought himself, he acquired for himself his own odin, a separate odin. And he made himself an evet to an individual person, tiratza, it has to be pierced. We're going to ask a question, it's not understood. And basically the question is going to be, number one, why does he not get pierced right away? The second he steals, or the second he becomes an evet, his ears should be pierced right away. And even if you're going to say that we're going to wait some time, why is Dafka Eved that can't afford to pay back? Any Eved that breaks Leisignev should be pierced. And in truth, any Aveda, Aseres Adibris we said before, is Kaila all the mitzvahs and all the Avedas. So anybody that's Eved on Aveda should get his ear pierced. What is it about the Ganav and about the Ganav that can't afford to pay that he is getting his ear pierced, and we're waiting 6 years until he says that he doesn't want to leave? So the first question is Aleph. He should have been pierced right away, as soon as he was over, as soon as he transgressed these commandments. Why is his ear not being pierced until 6 years pass? And only after 6 years is only if he says he wants to stay on. If he's ready to leave, there's no piercing. Second question. Why does Torah say this applies only a Ganev, someone who stole, a thief that cannot afford to pay, and therefore Bezdin sells him? The reason that he's being pierced because he heard the words Eloi Signev, and therefore Teratza, he went and he stole. It applies to any Ganav, even a Ganav who has money to pay back. Why is it only by this thief that is too poor to pay back that all of a sudden we say, oh, he transgressed Leisignev, and therefore we have to pierce his ear? Gimel, this reason is really applicable to all mitzvahs. So any sin or transgression that a person transgresses, a person should get for that Ritzia should get pierced. Why is it that only someone who was over on Lesignev, or someone who was over on Kilibin Yisrael Avodim, and made himself an Eved, only in those cases does the Torah apply this concept of piercing the ear? Seemingly the ear heard many mitzvahs, or many Avedis, of things that he shouldn't do by Har Sinai. Okay, so far we asked the question, why is the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's teaching in continuation to the teaching about the right ear? How does the teaching of Rabbi Shimon about the door and the mezuzah end up in the same Rashi? Then we asked, if the reason that the person is getting Ritziyah because his ear heard by Har Sinai certain things and he didn't listen, then why is it that? Why do we wait 6 years till the person says, I want to stay on? Why does it apply only to a Ganav who can't afford to pay back? And why doesn't it even apply to any person who does any Aveda? Gimel Gam Tzarech Lavin B'divrei Rashi. We have to understand even more in Rashi. And we're going to have 4 more questions. Aleph, Lama maybe Rashi Tam Nosef La'atzas Mishum Achru Bezdin Mishum Sh'avar Alei Signev. Why does I mentioned before that there's 2 reasons why a person becomes an Eved Ivri. One, because he stole and Bezdin sells him to get the money to pay back, or one, because he sold himself. Now, at the end of the 6 years, he's choosing whether he was sold by Bezdin or he chose to sell himself. At the end of the 6 years, he is choosing an Adin La'atzma. He's saying, I want to stay on with this Adin, and I want to stay, and therefore is he acquiring an Adin for himself, or he's keeping an Adin for himself. The fact that he initially got there through Lo Signoiv seems irrelevant. At the end of the day, he's breaking Kili B'nei Yisrael Avadim, because he's saying 6 years passed, and I still want to stay with this Adin. So why does Rashi bring the whole concept of Leisignev? Seemingly at the end of the 6 years, the Leisignev doesn't apply here. Lama, maybe Rashi Tam Neisef La'atzas Mishum Achru Bezdin. Why does Rashi bring a secondary reason, an additional reason, to pierce the one who was sold by Bezdin? Mishum Shavar Al Leisignev, because he was able on Leisignev. Mikivan Shein and Yirtzeh Lach Hashiyav Rosh Hashanim, since the person is not being pierced until after the 6 years passed. The Yachlit made it Shein and the Shayretz Ladoin, and he's deciding on his own free will to stay by his master, to stay with his master. Harigamu Yirtzeh Rakshan Asamoy Charatzmoy. So he too technically is only being pierced once he's selling himself. When he acquires an adin for himself by saying, I want to stay along, I want to stay on. So why does Rashi say about the problem of Leisignev? It doesn't matter why he was sold originally. What matters is that now he's being kain adin la'atzmai and he's violating Kili B'nei Yisrael Avadim. Beis the Meicher Atzmei because of Rashi Eisen Sheshama Kili B'nei Yisrael Avadim. The Holach v'Kana Adin La'atzmei Tiratza. If a person sells himself, Rashi says the problem is that he was kain Adin La'atzmei. He says it in past tense. V'Holach v'Kana, he went and he acquired a master for himself. Even though it's happening at the end of the 6 years, but he's being punished for what he did 6 years ago. Why doesn't Rashi say that he's being punished for what he did now? That now he's saying, I don't want to go free. Gimel. The next question is to know, why did Rashi say the words Sheshama al Har Sinai? Every word in Rashi is precise. Rashi does not add words, even if he's quoting a Medrash or a Gemara. He doesn't add extra words. If he adds extra words, it's because they're there to teach us something. So Rashi says, Oizen Sheshama al Har Sinai. So we're going to ask, what is the purpose of Rashi saying the words Al Har Sinai, as well as calling the pshat of Rabbi Shimon Doirish Mikra Zekim in Chaymer, also seemingly extra words. It is known that Rashi's style, when he only quotes from the Gemara or from the Medrash, words that are absolutely necessary to his pirush in Pshutei Shel Mikra, in the basic understanding of the pasuk. Therefore, we have to understand in this case, Aleph, what is the emphasis on saying that these words were heard at Har Sinai? It seemingly was sufficient to say the ear that heard the words Leisignev. Why is it important to know where the ear heard these words? Beis. Ma nageya lahaktim b'drashas Rabbi Shimon shehoya deirish mikra zeh kimin chomer. Why is it necessary to preface in the drasha of Rabbi Shimon that Rabbi Shimon would darshan, would teach this pasuk as a chomer, as a gishmak pshat, or as we'll say later, as I mentioned before, a chomer means either diamond, like diamonds, or like incense, like perfume, something that makes it more gishmak. Why is it necessary? If it's an important pshat, then it's an important pshat. If not, why is it necessary to introduce it as a chomer? And Daled, and this is the final question that we're going to ask. Duber kama pa'amim shekashirashi maybe as Shem bala memra u'bechtei levayer al pizeh eze inyan psuta shel mikra. Rashi does not usually bring the name of the person that taught this teaching. If he does, it's because there's something that needs to be added in psuta shel mikra. It's not such a difficult concept that has to be explained explicitly. But a quick and seasoned student might ask a question. And therefore Rashi alludes to the answer to this question of the sharp student by telling us the name of the person who gave this teaching. What is lacking? What is missing? What is the question in Psutei Shel Mikra that Rashi is answering by telling us the name of the Baal HaMemra, which is Sai Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as the Baal HaMemra of why the ear was chosen to be by Hashem, that it should be pierced, and again the memra or the drasha of Rabbi Shimon of why the delas and the mezuzah were chosen, that by them the ear is pierced. So these are the questions that we have on Rashi. So I already summarized the previous questions, so we'll just summarize Ois Gimel, and the questions are: why does Rashi mention Leisignov? L'cheira, seemingly the fact that he chose now to stay on with his master is a form of Kaina Adin La'atzmai, and Rashi should have just said that his ear is being pierced because he was Kaina Adin La'atzmai. Even by Moicher Atzmai, the question 2, it seems to imply that V'holach V'kana, that he's being punished for what he did 6 years ago. Why doesn't Rashi say that he's being punished for choosing to stay now? Number 3, why does Rashi add the extra words of Shama al Har Sinai and Rabbi Shimon Yodeirish Mikra Zekim in Chomer? And number 4, what is Rashi answering by giving us the names of the Baal HaMemra, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Shimon? Mabir B'kolzeh. So as we saw a couple of weeks ago when we learned the Rashi Sikha, and in general it happens very often, that all of the questions are really based on one initial understanding of Rashi, and as soon as we realize that Rashi is coming with something deeper, with something different, the whole Rashi flows effortlessly, beautifully. So let's understand the Habir B'Kolzeh to answer all of these questions. Ikar Kavanas Rashi v'Meshakasav v'Ma Eizan Ra Eizan Liratza Eina Lefarish Taima Dekra Lama Bachra Ater Reb Eizan Dafka. The fact that the Rashi brings in the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to explain to us why the ear is being pierced is not coming to explain to us why the Torah chose the ear. This is very important for the Sikha, and that is according to Pshat. We do not need to know the reasons why the Torah chooses a certain punishment or why the Torah chooses a certain din, because this is going to come up again in the future. Taimei hamikra, the reason for a din, the reason for a punishment, is not part of Psutei Shel Mikra. Psutei Shel Mikra has to know what to do, not why to do it. So therefore, why the ear was chosen is not part of Psutei Shel Mikra, and therefore Rashi does not bring that question, that answer, why the ear is being pierced, because it was lacking in Psutei Shel Mikra. Ella sheikushya hamiseireres bepashtos aksuvim al yidei pirush the oznei hainu hayimonis ukadilakaman. The reason Rashi introduces the question of why is the ear being pierced is because once he tells us that the ear here means the right ear, this will automatically raise the question, why the ear? And therefore Rashi has to bring it in, because in Psutei Shel Mikra, that question is going to become applicable. And this will be understood by introducing a general question. The general question that we're going to ask is, why are we so strict with this Eved? Why are we embarrassing him so much that for the rest of his life, his ear is going to be pierced? Especially since he didn't do to hurt anyone. He did it because he was in distress. He was hungry. He didn't have money for himself or his family, and he felt had no choice. So why would we turn around and give him such a harsh, embarrassing punishment? You'll understand this by introducing a general question in the whole concept. Why is this Eved receiving such a punishment that is a constant and permanent embarrassment, a constant and permanent defect? It's talking about a person who stole and does not have the means to return the theft or to repay it. And seemingly, generally, this would be because he is a very poor person, and he stole to calm down his hunger and the hunger of his family. His poverty removed him from operating properly, removed him away from operating according to what the Eibishter would want. But it wasn't his fault. It was the poverty. Why would we give him such a harsh punishment? Like the pasuk says in Mishlei, don't embarrass the thief. He's stealing to satiate his soul. Because he's hungry. Similarly, someone who's selling himself because of his difficult financial situation, he had to lower himself down, he had to embarrass himself, and then accept upon himself the rulership, the boss, the ownership of a master. This proves that his poverty put him under such stress until he did something that is unnatural. So when he sold himself, he had no choice. He was so poor, he saw no way out. And again, now that 6 years have passed, he again has a very good reason for not wanting to leave. He has a wife, he has children, he doesn't want to go away now. We can't really punish him so harshly for wanting to stay now with his master. I don't want to go for free. I don't want to go free. His argument is very logical. I love my wife and my children. Referring to the woman that was given to him by his master and the children that were born to them during this time. And when he goes free, he's going to have to leave his wife and children. Like the pasuk says clearly, the woman and the children and her children remain with the master. The Gemara brings in Shabbos that the Eibishter commanded, Hu Amar Vayehi, he said and it will be. Hu Tziva Vayamid, he commanded and it was so established. The Eibishter commanded into nature that a man should have an ava, should have a love and a connection to an attraction and a connection to his wife and to his children. So to tell him leave after 6 years, leave your wife and leave your children is unnatural. As a matter of fact, he brings in the Ha'ara from Tanya Perek Tes that one of the reasons that we say Birchas Kriya Shema, the Hachana to Kriya Shema, is because we have to overcome certain avas that we have built inside of us. We have to love Hashem. We have to overcome the ava to our Isha and to the Yeladim. And love Hashem. In other words, built into our nature is an ava to the Isha and the Yeladim. So therefore, the fact that the person wants to stay is logical, is sensible. So to punish him for that, to say, you have to be punished right now, seems a little unfair. Umitzad tmiyazu, and because of this question, we would come to say, the Torah chose this unusual punishment, not because it's harsh and it is permanent, but it's actually a light, an easy punishment. It was common in those days, maybe today also, but it was common to pierce the ear. People would do so, would choose to pierce their ears in order to put jewelry in it. Men and women, boys and girls. In other words, it was a common thing, and therefore the Torah says it's something that's a little bit embarrassing because it's permanent, and everyone's going to know that the ear was pierced. But at the same time, a lot of people did it. And therefore, it wouldn't come off as such a harsh punishment, because after all, he was poor. What did he do wrong? What did he do so bad already? He tried to make some money for his family. And even the fact that he's staying at the end is because he now has a wife and children. So that's how I would have understood the pasuk. That the Torah is saying, the guy is not such a bad guy after all. So let's give him a light punishment. Let's give him an ear piercing. Ulam al pi anal datam al pi oishei. Ulam al pi anal datam al derech hapshat laman nivchar heiz and dafka leiratzo b'chtei lahakil b'einish. If this would be the reason, the Eibishter chose the punishment here as an ear piercing, is because we're trying to lighten the punishment. This would then it would follow logically that the piercing should be in the left ear. Because the left, unless the person is a lefty, in most people, the left is less important than the right. Which is spelled Yud Dalet Chaf Hey Yad Smil Yad Shehi Kei. Rashi explains with regards to the left arm upon which we put tefillin, that it's the Yad Cha, it's spelled with a Chaf Hey at the end to imply Yad Kei, the weaker hand, which is the left hand. So just like the left hand is the weaker hand, so too the left ear is the less important ear, and therefore if we're trying to lessen the punishment, it would follow logically that the piercing should be in the left ear, which is of less importance, and not in the right ear, which is the more important ear. And now we're going to say, so when Rashi says the ear is the right ear, our first question was, why would I think it's the left ear? But Rashi says right away, maybe it's the left ear. But based on the fact that we're understanding at this point that the reason we're giving him this punishment is to lighten the punishment, we would think it's the left ear because it's less of a punishment than the left ear, because the left ear is a less important ear. And therefore Rashi says, logically you're right, it should have been in the left ear, but we have a and therefore we are compelled to say that it is the right ear, opposite of what we would have understood logically. We would have followed logically that it's the left ear because that makes the punishment smaller, and seemingly the piercing of the ear is here to minimize the punishment on the person. And what can we do? There's Gzeira Shava, and Gzeira Shava says, Yimanis, it's the right ear. And now we're going to say that if we're now walking away from the pshat, that the right ear, that the piercing of the ear is for a punishment, to lighten the punishment, and how do I know that it's for that reason, that we're walking away from that? Because we're saying it's the right ear, and if it was to minimize the punishment, it would have been the left ear. This opens up automatically a question: why the ear at all? If it was there to lighten the punishment, then we say, okay, ear piercing, everyone does ear piercings, so we'll give him an ear piercing, it's not such a big deal. But now we just said that we're not doing it for that reason. The proof is that we're giving it in the right ear. So now this automatically calls out to the Ben Chaimish L'Mikra and says, in that case, why the ear at all? What's the whole purpose of the ear piercing? Which means to say it's not really that we're trying to teach the reason of the pasuk. We're trying to understand if you're telling me the right ear, then there must be a deeper reason to the whole piercing. We have to understand what that is. If we're learning the Gzeira Shava, that we're doing the right ear, this raises the question, why the ear to be pierced? Mashma. So since we're choosing the right ear, this must imply to us that the ear is not being chosen in order to minimize the punishment, but for a different reason. And therefore we have to understand, why was the ear chosen to be pierced out of all of the other limbs in the body? Which this is the answer to our second question that we had asked. Why does he say umara? Why does he say it as a connection to the first thing about the Eizn HaYamanis? But now it makes sense, because the Eizn HaYamanis is telling us that the piercing is not in order to lighten the punishment. This raises the question, umara Eizn Liyiratza. And therefore Rashi comes to explain to us that the reason why the ear is being pierced is because it heard on our Sinai these mitzvahs of leisignoiv and kli b'nei Yisrael avodim, and it violated them. The ear that heard these commandments that are now being transgressed, the ear has to receive these punishments. And therefore the right ear is pierced, because the right ear is the better ear, the more important ear, which is therefore the ikir ear, the main ear that's doing the listening. Eizn HaYaman is davka, and therefore the right ear gets the punishment. Now the question is, okay, so the ear has to be punished because the ear heard these things, but why did tziyah? Why piercing? Mamshich Rashi, Ta'atam she'oizen nirtza machru bezdin b'gnei vasei umipnei ulevai ratam lo magiel nirtza nishkaze ritzia. Mamshich Rashi, Ta'atam she'oizen nirtza machru bezdin b'gnei vasei umipnei sheshama leisignev. The leib tam sheshama kili b'nei Yisrael avodim. And why Rashi is explaining, what did the ear hear? What is he doing wrong? Because he heard the words lo yisignev, and he went and he stole. Earlier on we asked the question, why don't we focus on the fact that he's now saying lo yitzei chavshi, I don't want to go free? Why are we thinking about the lo yisignev that happened 6 years ago? And this other question we asked is when someone sold himself. Again, if someone sold himself, we're punishing him not for saying now lo yitzei chavshi, but for selling himself 6 years ago. So we asked why not focus on what he's doing wrong now? So the Rebbe explains like this: if a person commits a theft and he is over on Lisignev, he was forced by his situation. Even though it does not justify his misconduct, at that point, we're not going to punish him with a piercing. And so to anybody that steals, probably the reason that they're stealing is because they feel under distress, they feel they need money, they feel they need something, they feel forced. It doesn't justify it, but they're not yet ready for a punishment. Move on. But it's understood when a person is stealing because he feels forced to do so, he's embarrassed by it. And he certainly doesn't want that his shame should be publicized in the open. Ve'im nimka le'eved, u'misparsim ha'davar shenimka b'gnevasai. So if he has to be sold as an eved because of his theft, and becomes public that he's an eved, this distresses him greatly. And every moment that he finds himself by his master, which is the time of his shame, he is eagerly waiting the moment of freedom. But if the person is not rushing to go free, but he wants to stay by his master, this proves to us that initially this wasn't embarrassing to him. Actually, he doesn't care in the publicity of the fact that he became an eved because he stole. His actions and the end reveal how he acted in the beginning, that he stole because of his bad character, and the fact that he transgressed leisignev wasn't because of his financial situation he was in distress. Therefore, if the ear heard leisignev, then we now discover that he stole not because he was desperate, but because he didn't care. Tiratza, his ear has to be pierced. And the same thing we're going to say with regards to someone who sold himself, because he was under, he had the need. He desperately needed the money. At the moment, you don't want to punish him. But if after the end of the 6 years he says, I don't want to go free, this proves that this whole idea of being an eved, being a slave, is not something that's such a stringent matter to him. And when he sold himself initially, it wasn't because he was under stress, it was because he doesn't care to be an eved. So therefore, when we punish him, we're punishing him for the past. Either for stealing in the past and not caring about how severe that is, or for selling himself in the past and not realizing or not caring, rather, how severe that is. Now, why are we punishing him for the past and not for now? Now also he's saying le'etzei chavshi. So he says what he's doing now is also justifiable somewhat. And I will explain. For wanting now to stay by his master, we're not punishing him with piercing, just for that. At somewhat, he is forced into the situation because of his natural love that he has to his wife and to his children. But now, he's not just saying he's saying by saying that, tells us he doesn't care so much to be an eved. This proves to the past that when he sold himself, it wasn't just under stress, but it was willingly, and therefore he is being pierced, his ear is being pierced, because he initially acquired an adon for himself, and now we know that he did so willingly. That the person that went and was sold by Bezdin, so he wasn't Meicher Atzmai, he was sold by Bezdin because he stole and then he had nothing to pay back. So we asked the question earlier, why does it say that he's being punished for leisignoiv and not for Kli B'nai Yisrael Avodim, for transgressing Kli B'nai Yisrael Avodim? So we understand that now. We're not punishing him for Kli B'nai Yisrael Avodim. Right now when he says Ahavta Yes Adoni, he's forced into it by his love of his family. So therefore Rashi says that he's being punished for the leisignev that he did 6 years ago. So let's summarize here before we go weiter. So basically we said that initially we thought that we would go for the left ear because we thought that the reason we're piercing the ear is to minimize the punishment as much as possible. But then when Rashi brought in a Gzeira Shava that said it's the right ear. As soon as we said it's the right ear, we now understand that this is not about minimizing a punishment. So that initially automatically raises the question, in that case, why the ear? And Rashi brings the teaching of Rabbi Shimon and Zakkai, that the ear is being pierced because of the fact that he transgressed either leisignev in the case of Machru Bezdin, or Kli B'nai Yisrael Avodim in the case of Moicher Atzmai. And so we explained, why are we punishing him for what he did 6 years ago? Because 6 years ago when he did it, initially we don't know if he did it because he felt he had no choice, or he did it because he doesn't care. But at the end of the 6 years, when he says, I'm ready to stay with my master, we now know that that when he did it initially, he didn't care about the severity of it. And therefore, we punish him for that. In the case of the Eved, in the case of the Moicher Atzmoi for Kli B'nai Yisrael Avodim, and in the case of the Machru Bezdin for the fact of leisignev, for the fact that he stole. Why are we not punishing him for saying now lo yeitzei chavshi? Because now he has a shtickle excuse. Because he could say, Ahavta Yasishti Vezbanai, I love my wife and my children. But nevertheless, Hayos that he's saying he wants to stay, even though he has a shtickle excuse. And he's also saying, Ahavta Yasadoni, this reveals that when he did it 6 years ago, he didn't care about the severity of it, and he wasn't doing it under stress, and therefore we're piercing his ear now for what he did 6 years earlier. Now, the next question that we're going to address is why Rashi says Eizin Sheshama al Har Sinai. And we're going to say that the fact that it was by Har Sinai just exacerbates the transgression. Because if he heard it by Har Sinai from the Eibishter himself, he should have had more faith in Hashem before going to steal. And the because this way, by saying these words, Al Har Sinai, this underscores, this emphasizes even more the severity of this transgression and the reason why he has to be pierced. If you're saying that it was an Har Sinai, who did he hear it from? He heard it from Hashem. And even though Moshe Rabbeinu repeated it later, but Moshe Rabbeinu was repeating what was coming straight from Hashem. The Goli v'yadu alefanav, and the Eibishter it is revealed. Hashem knows that people sometimes come to a state of poverty. And a person will feel like he has no choice but to steal or to sell himself just to be able to provide for his family. And still, nevertheless, Hashem says, don't steal. And Hashem said, you're my servants and you're nobody else's servants. But the HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Eibishter who provides and sustains all of his creations, would certainly find him a parnasa in another way, and not that he would have to transgress the Eibishter's ratzon, the Eibishter's will. Even when he is in a very difficult situation, he has to trust in Hashem that will certainly help him and take him out of his dilemma, of his hardship. And since he lacked the faith in Hashem, and he transgressed the Eibishter's commandment, the ear that heard, do not steal, the ear that heard that you are my slaves, my servants, has to be pierced. So by saying Al Har Sinai, it's telling us, it's underscoring the greatness of this person's sin. The person should have known that the Eibishter knows his matzav. And the Eibishter told him Leisignev. The Eibishter didn't say Leisignev, but if you're poor, you can go steal. No, the Eibishter said, don't steal, even though I know that there's poor people out there. And in addition to that, the Eibishter is Zonim of Farnas everyone. The Eibishter could provide for him too. A different form of Parnasa. The fact that he stole without having enough emunah in Hashem that the Eibishter would provide for him and for his family, that calls even more than just stam stealing, that calls for the piercing of the ear. And now, in Ois Ches, he's going to explain the opinion, the fact that Rashi brings in Rabbi Shimon. And he's going to say that by bringing in Rabbi Shimon, which is talking about the delos and the mezuzah, he's not coming to answer the question why the delos and the mezuzah. We said earlier that Rashi is not here to explain time of the Kra, to explain the reasons of the pasuk. But by bringing up the fact that Reb Shimon was deirish, the delos and the mezuzah, it shows us that every detail in this punishment is reflective of the person's avera. And this supports the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Pirush of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that the reason why the oizen is being pierced is because the oizen heard, the ear heard these tzivuyim and didn't follow them. To add an extra explanation and to make it more geschmack, more to lahamtik, to make it more sweet, that which it says earlier, that the fact that the ear is being pierced is because the ear heard these tzivuyim from Hashem. Moisif Rashi umevi abehem shechlazeh Reb Shimon ayodeish mikrazeh, that Reb Shimon dies on this pasuk, even though the delos and the mezuzah is not something that's negei at the psut shel mikra. From this teaching of Reb Shimon, that the fact that the delos and the mezuzah were chosen is because they were eidim when Hashem jumped over, when Hashem passed over the homes of the Yidden, and he said, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim, and nevertheless this Yid transgressed this tzivui. So therefore, we see how the details of the punishment, even we're in the house, the ear is being pierced, is precise. That each detail in the punishment is alluding to and emphasizing the area where this person sinned, which is the pasuk of Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim. The Rashi Atzmi Mevair Atam Al Masha'evi Drasha Reb Shimon, and therefore Rashi explains why am I bringing the Shita, the Drasha of Reb Shimon, even though it's not negate of Pshuta Shel Mikra. Shemaitik, Bezeh Shemaitik, by this that he uses the words Reb Shimon Yodeirish Mikra Zeh Kimin Chaymer, that Reb Shimon dash on this pasuk like a Chaymer. Chaymer Pirusha Tzureir HaMargolius Utzteir HaBoisim. I mean, Chaymer is different places in Gemara is translated differently. Here he's referencing the Gemara, the Rashi in Kiddushin, and Rashi in Kiddushin teaches Chaymer to mean either a bundle of diamonds, or a setting for a diamond, or straight up a bundle of perfume or of pleasant smelling herbs. Umedayik Rashi. Rashi is trying to tell us that this Pirush of Reb Shimon is trying to do to help us, just like it's trying to accomplish what diamonds or perfume accomplish. A diamond in a room, and especially a few diamonds or a setting of diamonds, it spreads light and illuminates the room and everything that's inside of it. You know, a diamond is Rashi brings in the Rebbe brings in the order 40 on the pasuk Tsoyar Tasel Ateva, that according to one opinion, Tsoyar was a margalis, was a stone, precious stone, and its purpose was there for light. It's a whole sikha elsewhere about Tsoyar, if it was a window and if it was a diamond. But there's one opinion that says that it was there as a diamond and it was there to bring light. So the purpose, one of the things a diamond does in a room is it illuminates the room. So too, when a person wears a diamond as part of a jewelry and for beauty, even though he's wearing it, or he or she is wearing it in a certain place on the body, it affects the whole person. It adorns the entire person that's wearing it. So too, a bundle of perfume or of pleasant smelling herbs, it spreads a pleasant smell, a pleasant aroma in the whole surrounding. So the Rashi is saying over here, I want to bring you this drasha of Rabbi Shimon that's going to spread light and positive understanding on the discussion that we're already having. So therefore Rashi says that this pirush is like a chaymer, like something pleasant, like something beautiful, like something illuminating. That this pirush, why the delos and the mezuzah were chosen for the piercing, because the Yidden were avodim in Mitzrayim, and Hashem said, you're going to come out of Mitzrayim and be my avodim, and not any more avodim, and the delos and mezuzah were aidim to this. This adds an explanation in the previous thing but why the ear is being pierced. That the ear is being pierced because it was one, just like the delos and the mezuzah were aidim to the Kli B'nai Yisrael Avadim, the ear was the one that heard Kli B'nai Yisrael Avadim. And we see from this drasha of Rabbi Shimon that in this concept of Ritziyah, these details really, really matter. I had a question, which I'm going to leave as a question. Here it says the words of Teishayahu, Avodim b'Mitzrayim. Earlier when we quoted the Rashi, the Rashi says, Eidim b'Mitzrayim. The delos and the mezuzah were Eidim in Mitzrayim. I'm not sure if this is a printing mistake. I'm not big enough to say that. And I guess if it means here that the Yidden were Avodim in Mitzrayim, or it means that the delos and mezuzah were Eidim in Mitzrayim, and it says here Avodim, I'm leaving that in a question. I did not get a chance to find the answer to that before I had to come and sit here and learn with you. So now we know that in order to prove his point and to make it more geschmack and elaborate a little bit on this idea that every detail in this punishment is meduyik, is precise according to what the person did, Rashi brings in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the drasha of Rabbi Shimon, to add an extra light and an extra geschmack to this Rashi. Now moving to so obviously Rashi is not coming to just to explain the reason of the pasuk. Because it's not Rashi's style, it's not Rashi's way when teaching Pshuti Shel Mikra, basic understanding of the pasuk, to explain the reasons, the reasons of the punishments. The only reason that Rashi needs to introduce this, to explain this idea of the Eizin, is only there because to take down the question, that after we said that it was the right ear, we had a question in that if it's not there to minimize the punishment, why the ear at all? So therefore Rashi had to bring this opinion. In other words, if we didn't have the discussion of the right ear or the left ear, Rashi wouldn't have to discuss the whole ear thing. Torah says the ear is the ear. But once you tell me that the right ear is being used, and I understood from that the reason is not in order to minimize the punishment, but it's for something else, this immediately raises the question, then why the ear at all? And therefore, at this point, Rashi feels the need to introduce the answer of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And now we go back to Rabbi Shimon. Rashi adrasha did Rabbi Shimon beloy vav amoisif veloy b'dibra maschil b'fnei atzmei lifnei za'al el hadelas. Therefore, Rashi brings the drasha of Rabbi Shimon. It's not as a vav ha'moisef, which means it's not a direct connection, but Rashi doesn't either bring it earlier when it says El adelas oyel mezuzah, because by El adelas oyel mezuzah, it's irrelevant still why the delas and the mezuzah, because we just said that Rashi doesn't go into to explain time of the kra. Ki drasha einel lefarish time of the kra. The reason that Shimon teaches it is in order to teach the reasons. And Rashi doesn't teach the reasons. And therefore, by Ela Delas Oyel Mezuzah, there was no purpose for Rashi to introduce the drasha of Rabbi Shimon. Only after he brought in the pshat of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did he then bring the drasha of Rabbi Shimon to support and strengthen the drasha of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And that's why he brings the name Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Shimon that Rabbi Shimon, it says in the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon had a seder. He was the one who was always Deish time of the Kra. So therefore he says, this pshat is generally said by Rabbi Shimon for time of the Kra. And therefore earlier I didn't bring it, because then it wasn't relevant. I brought it here, Kimin Chaymer, not as a time of the Kra, but Kimin Chaymer. Rashi brings it as a hemshech to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai because now it becomes a geshmak of Kimin Chaymer. So I'm just going to repeat that to explain. Originally when it says Ela Delas Oyel Mezuzah, Rashi has no reason to bring the drasha of Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon is Deish time of the Kra. Rabbi Shimon is trying to explain the time of the timing of the Einshe HaTorah, and Rashi does not bring a time of Einshe HaTorah. Only later, and that's why he says Rabbi Shimon. That's why he mentions Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is a time of the Kra guy, and I'm not a time of the Kra guy, and therefore I'm not going to bring in Rabbi Shimon earlier on. Only after he introduces Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he's trying to explain the details of this Ritzia. Only here does he introduce Reb Shimon not as a time of the Kra, but Kimin Chaymer. Besignin Acher, just to say it in other words, because it's just so to say it in a more straightforward way. In response to the question, why is the ear being pierced? There's two nukudas. Aleph, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The first thing I'll introduce to you is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that the ear heard Libnei Salavadim. Beis, Reb Shimon HaYoderis. The second detail I'll bring you is that Reb Shimon is darshaning about the delas and the mezuzah. But it's coming as an answer to the question of Ma'arayz and Leiratza. That just like by the delas and the mezuzah, we're medayik to do it by the door because each detail is supposed to reflect the person's sin. So too the oizen is pierced because it's reflecting the person's sin. But the Reb Shimon HaYoderis is not here to tell us delas and mezuzah. It's here as an answer to the Umar Ra'ez and Lehiratza. So we now can go through the whole Rashi, and everything makes perfect sense. The Rashi begins with saying that it's the Imanis, the right ear. So we ask the question, maybe it's the left ear. I thought the whole reason you're doing piercing is to minimize the punishment, and then you do the left ear. So Rashi says, you have a good point, but there's a Gzeirah Shava. The Gzeirah Shava says the right ear. So immediately comes the person and says, if it's the right ear, so you're not trying to minimize his punishment. Then why the ear at all? Why not pierce the finger? So Rashi says, we have a Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He says that the ear heard Kili b'nei Salavadim, or the ear heard Leisigneif. In other words, in this case, the Torah is choosing that the Ritzia should follow, the details of the Ritzia should follow what the person actually did. And therefore, the ear, there was one that heard these tzivuyim, the ear has to be pierced. And to prove it to you, that in this punishment of Ritzia, we're going by the details of what the person did. There's a drasha of Reb Shimon that really isn't relevant here, but we'll see from it that even the choice of where we're piercing his ear, by the delas and the mezuzah, is based on the fact that the delas and the mezuzah were Eidim when he said Kli b'nei Yisrael avadim, implying that the details here are all reflecting the sin of the person, and this strengthens the answer of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that the ear too is being pierced because of the fact that it reflects what the person did wrong over here. We still have one last question that wasn't answered. And that is, why is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's name mentioned? And he's going to say two things about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Number one, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was someone who lived Torah. Torah was his life. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is going to tell us that the Torah knew that poverty exists, and yet the Torah says, Le signev. So, you can't use that as an excuse. Additionally, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches how important a gemach, a gemilas chesed, a loan, is. And if a person is down and out, there's always an option of taking a gemach. So there's always a way out, and therefore, he did not have to go and steal. So we answered the whole Rashi for the Chamesh L'Mikra. But now you have a sharp, seasoned student who's going to say, come on, have some rachmanis on this guy. He was poor. Didn't have money. And he had no choice. Have some rachmanis on him and don't give him such a punishment. And also the fact that he says, I love my master, which we said is a big, huge problem. But still, he's also saying, I love my wife and my kids. In other words, as much as he loves his master, he also loves his wife and his kids, which this is something that the Eibishter put into our nature, and you can't really blame him for it. So this is what the Talmud Memulach, the seasoned, quick, sharp student is going to ask. And therefore, maybe Rashi shetamzam Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Therefore, Rashi says that this reasoning was taught by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Kol inyonis Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lachar shenikra Rabban. Hayal limudat Torah. The whole purpose of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was to learn Torah. Hagam showed you Beis HaChurban, even though he lived through the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Ula'achrav, and after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. She'ozay HaMatzav shel dachkus v'anius v'chulu, a terrible, terrible time of poverty. For example, the Gemara tells us that the Biryonim, the bandits, who wanted to fight against the Romans, they burnt down all the storage houses of wheat and everything else. So there was nothing left in Yerushalayim. The people were very, very poor. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, all he wanted was Torah. The Chazal tell us, that after 40 years, 40 years, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was involved in commerce. And then for 40 years, he learned Torah. Then for 40 years, he taught Torah. And the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai never walked 4 amas without learning or thinking Torah. And nobody would come any earlier than him to Beis HaMikdash. He was always the first to the yeshiva. During the Churban, when he had a chance to ask for 3 things, one of the things that he asked was to save Torah. He didn't even ask to save the Beis HaMikdash. He asked to save Torah. By asking for the city of Yavna, which is where the Chachamim lived at that time. And by saving Yavna, he would save the teachers. And therefore he would save the transmission of Torah to the future generations. And this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai taught to every Yid. Like he says in Aves, if you learned a lot of Torah, don't be too haughty with yourself. Don't be too proud of yourself. Because that is the purpose of your creation. The whole reason you were created was to learn Torah. The purpose of every person, even of a person that's involved during the day in business matters. But his purpose, the ikid in Yonei B'chaim, and his main reason for living is to learn Torah. And therefore Rashi says, this teaching was taught by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who's all about Torah. The Torah commanded to give the person a wife. And the Torah says, the Torah also gave us the ava to an isha. And nevertheless, this same Torah told him, after 6 years you go free. So too the Torah tells us that poverty will not stop amongst on the earth. And nevertheless, the Torah says not to steal. In other words, earlier on, we were defending this guy. In other words, he's poor, he wants his wife and kids. We were defending him because initially that's how we are. When we look at another person, we try to be lamed zchus. But now we're being taught a new look on life. When Torah says something, that is reality. That is the ultimate reality. Even though you want to defend this person, you want to justify this person, it's a good justification until the Torah says otherwise. When the Torah says a person like Yechilim and Zakai, the Torah is everything. The Torah says Yetzer Lachav Shechinam, you go free, even though it's difficult. The Torah says Lei Signev, knowing that there's poverty out there, knowing that there's struggles, knowing that there's hardships. Torah says Lei Signev, that is the final say. And therefore, we tell the Talmud B'mulach, this person has to receive a consequence. Because, especially if you're invoking Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because he has to know that when Torah says, that is the final say on this matter. Eis Yud, another aspect of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. V'oid matzinu Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shehifli me'oid inyan gemach. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai speaks of great importance about the idea of a gemach. Gemach means a gemilas chesed, which is usually a reference to a loan. It was super obvious to the Nasan. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai v'talmidei Rabbi Yeshua avru al yad mekim hamikdash. In obvious to the Nasan it says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his disciple, his student Rabbi Yeshua, they passed by the place of the Beis Hamikdash. V'ro Beis Hamikdash b'churbanai, and they saw the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rabbi Yeshua elanu al zashu charev. Rabbi Yeshua said, "Woe to us that this Beis Hamikdash was destroyed." No, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Al yera lecha." Don't feel too bad. Yesh lanu kapara achas kemoisa ve'eza zegmach. There is something that we have today that could replace the Beis Hamikdash for us. And what is that? That's loaning money. So we see that Yishva inin gemach l'nei Beis Hamikdash. He compares the gemilas chesed, he compares the loan to the Beis Hamikdash. And this is another remez in what Rashi is giving to us by mentioning the name of Rabbi Zakai. Because this is even understood more why the person is being pierced, his ear is being pierced. Even someone who's in difficult straits, Torah is still concerned for him. Tzivsa gives a commandment, as we know, the Chacham tell us that im kesef is not im if, but im is a lashon that it's an obligation on a yid to lend another yid money. And since there's an obligation for us to lend money, he would have certainly found more than one person that would be willing to lend the money. So he should have made the effort to borrow the money and not to transgress these tzivuyim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, to answer the question, what did the person do so terrible? He was in difficult straits. Says number one, no, difficult straits is not an excuse, because if you're a Torah person, Torah says lei signev regardless of the situation, and Torah says yetzer lachav shechinam regardless of your avasa to the isha and the banim. In addition to that, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai also taught of the greatness of the loan, so he could have gone and borrowed money. There's other ways out besides for stealing. And now the Rashi is complete. Now we understand why Rashi says we understand why by saying Hayamanis it invokes the question Ma umar ve'ezen lihiratza. We understand why the person is being punished for what he did six years ago at the beginning, not for now, because 6 years ago is when he did the initial sin. It's only that now we didn't know how bad it was until now when he said after Yasadoini. We now know that Rabbi Shimon is brought in as a way to understand Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai even better. And we also know that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's name is brought in to answer the Talmud B'mulach, to explain that why it is so terrible that this person went ahead and stole money even though he was in a very difficult situation. Finally, we have the Yena Shal Torah, which in this case is the Hira, the lesson. One of the areas of Yenush al Torah, the wine of Torah, where we draw out the lesson and the avodas Hashem from this Rashi. Yes, atrudim kol kach b'skeim agashmim b'meshach sheishes me'achol ad she'em avodim la'avodim. There are those people that are so involved in their material matters that they are slaves to slaves. They're slaves l'ritzeino ma'agashmi. They're slaves to their physical desires. Just like this person who acquired a master for himself for 6 years. And even when it comes the 7th day, at the end of the 6 days, which is Shabbos, which is a day a person should be free, to rest and to relax from the mundane matters of the rest of the week. They're not even willing to go free, to relieve themselves, to redeem themselves from their love and their slavery to their physical matters. And they're totally engrossed and involved in physical matters. And therefore comes the lesson. The Eibusher commanded us that we are avodim of Hashem. The person's avodah is to serve Hashem through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. As we mentioned before in the name of Rechanam and Zakaiki, the Kachnei Tzarta, if this is what you were created for, Zui Tachlis Yiridas Nishmaso Yuslichusay Beilam. This is the purpose of the descent of the neshama and his mission in this world. Even if your person is learning, even the person is engaged in business or in other matters, the reason he's here is to learn Torah. And since this is a commandment from the Eibusher, who the Eibusher is sustaining the entire world, Hashem will certainly give him the necessary strength that he needs to be able to fulfill his shlichus. Even during the weekdays, when he is appropriately involved in his physical matters, he's not enslaved to his business. His job, his business, his work is not in a way that he's a slave to his job. He is manipulating his gashmias, he's utilizing his work for his ultimate purpose, to be a servant to Hashem. And therefore, when Shabbos comes, Mekadesh, he sanctifies himself, Mavdil, he separates himself, and totally lifts himself up from his mundane material matters and his business matters. And what he does is he goes and he learns Torah and serves Hashem. So the lesson is just like we said in the Torah, that you have a kind of person that after 6 years of being an Eved is so enslaved to his master that he doesn't want to leave. The same thing can happen to one of us, that we are involved 6 days a week in our inner business, in our material matters, and the material matters begin to control us. We become slaves to them, to the point that when Shabbos comes, we can't stop thinking about it. Last week the Sikha was about Dibur Machshava on Shabbos, about thinking words of Malacha, about speaking words of Malacha. A person could be in a matzav that he's so engrossed in his business, he's so enslaved to his job, that when it comes Shabbos, he's thinking about it. He can't get rid of it. So a person has to know that the Eibusher created us in a way that we are the Avadim of the Eibusher. And yes, we are meant to engage in material matters for 6 days a week, but not as a way that we become slaves to it, but in a way that we use it, to elevate it, to give us the power and the strength that we should serve Hashem. What's the raya? Where's the Evan Aboichin? How do I know if I'm enslaved to my job, or I'm utilizing my job to become a servant of Hashem? What happened Shabbos? If I'm still engrossed in my job, Shabbos, or my job, or any form of material matters on Shabbos, it means that my material matters is controlling me. But if Shabbos, I'm able to elevate myself, and able to daven, and to learn, and to be engrossed in spiritual matters, that I know that the job is just there, or the material matters are just there to serve me, to help me be an evet to Hashem. But I can always, when it comes Shabbos, I'm above it. When a person is able to conduct himself properly in this way, when learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, this is how a person goes free from his personal galus. And this hastens the exit, the going out from the main galus. Paul etzel machrive beis hamikdash sheyitnu leyavne v'chachameha. Rabbi Shimon and Zakkai, during the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, he accomplished that the very people who were destroying the Beis Hamikdash should give him Yavne v'chachameha, Teira Sanhedrin Gedera, the Teira that was being taught by the Sanhedrin. And we see that Rabbi Shimon and Zakkai was able, even within the Churban, to save the world through Teira. And through learning Torah, the person becomes free. And speedily we will merit to the coming of Mashiach. Into the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And the door and the mezuzah that were Eidim in Mitzrayim. That when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the doors sunk into the ground. Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara that in certain places we find that it says that the Beis Hamikdash is going to come down, the third Beis Hamikdash is going to come down, ready made, and it's going to just come down into this world. In another place we find that it says that Mashiach is going to build the Beis Hamikdash. So which one is it? If it's already built in Shemayim, why is Mashiach going to have to build it? So the famous answer is that the Beis Hamikdash is going to come down from Shemayim, ready made, minus the doors. The doors were tavu b'aretz shareh. The doors were sunken into the ground by the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and the Yidden are going to get the doors out of the ground and affix them to the Beis Hamikdash. And since a building without a door is not a completed building, by adding on the door, that'll be the completion of the Beis Hamikdash, and will be considered as if Mashiach and the Yidden built it. So he uses the Delos and the Mezuzah as part of the since they were Eidim in Mitzrayim. So he says that when we learn Torah in a proper way, we go free from our own galus. When we go free from our own galus, we're able to bring the end of the whole galus that we're in, the galus haklali, and we'll merit the coming of Mashiach, the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash, and the affixing of the Delos and the Mezuzah, which is galu v'yashlimu binyan Beis Hamikdash b'milui. They will be revealed and they will complete the binyan Beis Hamikdash. May it be speedily in our days.